How James Gunn's DCU is like the Star Wars universe, explained by Superman star David Corenswet. When James Gunn talks about building the new DC universe, he rarely uses the word reboot without immediately qualifying it. This isn't about wiping the slate clean for the sake of it. It's about world building. And in recent interviews, Superman star David Corenswet has offered one of the clearest, most revealing metaphors yet for what Gunn is aiming to do by comparing the DCU to the Star Wars universe. At first glance, the comparison feels almost too neat. DC and Star Wars are very different storytelling machines. One is rooted in American superhero mythology, the other in mythic space fantasy. But Corenswet's explanation goes deeper than genre. He's talking about structure, tone, and, most importantly, how audiences are meant to live inside a fictional universe over time. And suddenly, the comparison makes a lot of sense. A universe that already exists when you arrive. One of the most important things Corenswet has highlighted about Gunn's DCU is the idea that the world doesn't begin with Superman. It already exists. That's straight out of the Star Wars playbook. When audiences first met Luke Skywalker in A New Hope, the galaxy felt ancient and lived in. The Jedi were already a fallen order. The Republic had already collapsed. Darth Vader wasn't being introduced. He was feared. You didn't need a title card explaining every historical detail. The story trusted viewers to pick things up as they went. James Gunn wants the DCU to work the same way. Instead of treating Superman as ground zero, the film drops us into a world where heroes, villains, governments, and cosmic forces already have histories. Corenswet has emphasized that his Clark Kent isn't discovering who he is. He's learning how to exist within a complicated moral ecosystem. That's a huge shift from previous DC strategies, which often felt obligated to relitigate origins over and over again. This DCU isn't asking, what if superheroes existed? It's asking, now that they exist, how does the world function? That's pure Star Wars energy. Myth first, continuity second. Another key point in Corenswet's Star Wars comparison is how Gunn prioritizes mythology over rigid continuity. Star Wars has never survived on airtight lore alone. It thrives on archetypes. The hopeful farm boy, the fallen knight, the ruthless empire, the flicker of rebellion. Continuity bends when the emotional truth demands it. That flexibility is why Star Wars can support trilogies, animated series, spin-offs, and wildly different tones without collapsing under its own weight. Gunn is applying that philosophy to DC. Rather than building a hyperlinear timeline where every project exists solely to set up the next one, the DCU is designed to feel like a mythological tapestry. Individual stories matter more than checklist world building. A film doesn't exist just to tease another film. It exists to say something meaningful on its own. Corenswet has hinted that Superman embraces this approach by leaning into timeless ideas, hope, kindness, responsibility, rather than obsessing over Easter eggs. That doesn't mean continuity doesn't matter. It means continuity serves the story, not the other way around. In other words, the force comes before the flowchart. Different corners, different tones, same universe. One of the reasons Star Wars has endured for decades is tonal flexibility. You can jump from the swashbuckling optimism of A New Hope to the political cynicism of Andor to the mystical weirdness of the Clone Wars, and it all still feels like the same universe. James Gunn has been very open about wanting that same tonal diversity in the DCU. Corenswet's comments reinforce this idea. His Superman isn't meant to define the emotional register of the entire franchise. Instead, he's one pillar of it, just as Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, or Leia each represent different emotional entry points into Star Wars. This is where DC has historically struggled. Past attempts often forced every property into the same tonal mold, either grimdark seriousness or quippy self-awareness. Gunn's DCU rejects that one-size-fits-all approach. A cosmic Green Lantern story doesn't need to feel like a Gotham crime thriller. A supernatural Swamp Thing project shouldn't sound like a Superman speech. The connective tissue isn't tone, it's world logic. That's exactly how Star Wars works. Heroes as ideals, not just characters. Perhaps the most Star Wars-like element of Corenswet's Superman is how he frames the character as an ideal, not just a protagonist. Luke Skywalker isn't compelling because he's powerful. He's compelling because he represents hope in a universe that's forgotten how to believe in it. Superman occupies the same symbolic space. Corenswet has spoken about portraying Clark as someone who chooses optimism even when cynicism would be easier. That's not accidental. Gunn has been explicit about Superman functioning as the moral center of the DCU, not because he's perfect, but because he tries. In Star Wars, the Jedi aren't defined by their lightsabers. They're defined by restraint, compassion, and belief in something larger than themselves. When the Jedi lose those values, the galaxy collapses. Gunn's DCU is exploring a similar question. What happens when symbols stop meaning something? Superman isn't there to punch harder than everyone else. He's there to remind the universe who it's supposed to be. That's Mythic Storytelling 101. And it's why the Star Wars comparison resonates. Villains as systems, not just individuals. Another subtle but crucial parallel Cornsweet has hinted at is how villains function in this new DCU. In Star Wars, the true antagonist is rarely a single person. The Empire is a system. The dark side is a philosophy. Even Darth Vader is ultimately a symptom of something larger. Gunn's DCU appears to be moving in the same direction. Rather than positioning every conflict as hero versus bad guy, the universe emphasizes institutions, power structures, and ideological clashes. Superman isn't just fighting enemies, he's navigating a world that may not want what he represents. That gives the story's weight beyond spectacle. It allows conflicts to persist across projects without requiring the same villain to return endlessly. Just like Star Wars, the enemy isn't always a face, it's a worldview. Why this matters for the future of DC. Cornsweet's Star Wars analogy isn't just clever marketing. It explains why James Gunn's DCU feels fundamentally different from what came before. This isn't a cinematic universe built like a